This week, just yesterday, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, released its monthly oil market report showing Nigeria's oil production that dipped in February to 1.46 million barrels per day, about 70,000 barrels less than the 1.53 million barrels per day reported in January. Let's talk to Chinan Dikwa now, as the Vice Chair, African Energy Council. Great to have you on the show, Chinan. It's been a while.
Ladi, it really has. Yeah, pleasure to be here. How are you?
I'm fine. Well, so it's that time we've been waiting for. Yeah, we have the monthly report from OPEC. So how are you seeing the latest oil production report? I'm looking at it from the African continent and, global production in February.
Yeah, so Ladi, I think there's not much of a story here for this month. And the reality of it is it's exactly what you described there. Last month, the numbers were about 1.5 million barrels per day. This month is dipped slightly by 5% to 1.46. So it's not a massive story, I don't think, because, very, very much you could say it's stayed flat. In fact, the number we're seeing right now is exactly what we saw in about January of this year, which was about 1.48. So it stayed relatively flat. I think the fundamental thing here that people can take away is the fact that we have seen a huge increase in oil production in the last 18 months. If you go back to January of 2022, about 1.1 million barrels of oil production. Today, we are 30% higher than that. In fact, we're producing at our OPEC quota, and I think that's the biggest thing here. So we have been able to meet that. So it's a huge kudos to government in terms of what they've done. The question is, what's the next frontier? Where do we go from here? I think that's the big question. The forecasts are that we'll get to about 2 million barrels. Whether that's possible is for us to wait and see for end of this year.
What do you think, looking at the data there, we're seeing 1.46 million barrels production. That's for February compared to 1.53. What do you think is responsible for Nigeria's production, dipping, slightly though, even though it's slightly, but it's still a dip? What do you think is responsible for that?
Ladi, honestly, that is well within the margin of error. It's a 5% drop. That could be anything. That could be operational maintenance. That could be anything. It's very much well within, the margin of error. So I wouldn't focus on that at all. I think the fundamental question to ask is, we forecast that oil will be at 2 million barrels per day by the end of this year. The question is, how do we get there? What new fields are going to come up? What workover and interventions are going to give us that 500,000 barrels per day extra? That is the fundamental question. And when I look in the horizon, in the short term, honestly, I don't see it as yet. There are glimmers of hope, I'm going to say. There are glimmers of hope, particularly around small independents. Most of the new production that we're having. So just for context, actually, Ladi. January 2022, we're 1.1 million barrels. Today, we're about 1.5, roughly. A lot of that increase has not even been the super majors. A lot of that increase has come from small independents, the Hears Holding, the Seplats, those small companies. And I think that's where the success story is. Nigeria has been able to pull off on the expertise of large majors, Shell, Chevron, Exxon, all of that, and pass it into these small companies. And they are getting more barrels out of those fields that they bought. That is the big story. So the question is, we're seeking 500,000 barrels. Is that going to come from these small independents? That is what will be very exciting. Because if it does come from them, that means we've learned a lot. We can take that into Angola. We can take it into Namibia. We can start to BBC basin around Senegal. So, export of services and genetics, basically.
Right, and we still see the top producers in Africa. There's still Nigeria, Libya, and Algeria. But this is a critical time where the Dangote Refinery and other refineries need feedstock to produce petroleum products. But we're getting reports that Dangote Refinery is eyeing more, crude from Angola and Algeria, while the Naira for crude deal is still in limbo at this time.
Yeah, so I think, let's bear in mind that in the space where we are, there's a lot of information coming out. So 2 days ago, we got the report that the Naira to crude deal was being suspended. The NNPC has already come out and dispelled that. They said, it's just under negotiation. And it is true that the deal was meant to expire in March. So I think that makes sense. But to your point there, Ladi, bear in mind the capacity of Dangote Refinery is 650,000 barrels per day. Okay, if you look at what happened in October of 2024, where the Federal Executive Committee came up with an order to say that the NNPC had to sell a huge portion of its production to Dangote. I think at the time was something like 385,000 barrels. In total, 450. So including other small refineries. But Dangote would get about 385,000. Operationalizing that and making sure he got that 385 has been a problem. He's gotten a huge chunk of it. I think so far to date, the NNPC confirmed that they gave him about 48 million barrels of crude so far, and that's great. But the reality of it is, it needs 650,000 barrels per day. And that is where the delta is. This man has put huge money down, and he has to operate at capacity for him to be able to finance the debt and maximize production from these facilities. So what you're seeing there, to your point, is he has to look, to the US to pull off some WTI. He has to look at Angola, where you described that. He has to look at Algeria to try to see if he can source the crude from there. But would that be easy? Honestly, I don't think it will. I know some of the crude has already landed, and he's using that. I think it's a very short-term mechanism. I don't see how this could work longer term. The reason for that is even when you go to Angola, Angola has huge contracts with China. Most of their crudes are going to China. They don't sell a lot on the open market. So I think Dangote would have to be inventive to find crude elsewhere. I do not see that as the long-term alternative.
All right, it's one thing, to source your feedstock from other countries, even though we're in an oil-producing country right here in Nigeria. So if this continues, the Dangote Refinery having to source from, other African countries and, WTI, as you mentioned, how does this, translate when it comes to petroleum product pricing in Nigeria? Should we just expect, higher prices, or we might still see this battle there, this price war continue taking prices lower?
Absolutely. That's a very smart question, Laddie. So a couple of things to bear in mind. If Dangote keeps doing that and keeps buying crude on the open market, a few things would happen. There will be, first of all, a pressure on our FX because he has to source all of that in dollars. And to source all of that in dollars, he has to find it from Nigeria. So there will be pressures on our FX, so our currency will get devalued in a very short term. In fact, just for context, let me just say this. Before the Naira for crude deal, just the FX costs on subsidy buying of external, petrol products to bring in was responsible for about 30% of the value of our currency. So just FYI. So that pressure has been taken off right now, which is why you can see that the Naira has picked up strength over the last couple of months. If that's to happen again and he starts to go out onto the international market, then expect to see volatility, FX volatility. That's number one. But number two, and more important, the crude oil that would hit the pumps in Kano and Abuja and Lagos and Calabar and all of that would be much more expensive. The reason for that is just the FX movement and all of the costs, because if you think about the freight, if you're bringing from the US all the way here, all those freight costs and everything would have to be built into the cost that will be passed on to the consumer. So fundamentally, from that standpoint, yes, we would expect that price to go up. And of course, Laddie, this, if price goes up, then ultimately inflation will start to creep up, because the price of almost anything in Nigeria is denominated by cost of transportation. So there is another part there, which is inflation that could also start to creep up. So I think there are several dimensions. It's so important that Dangote is locked into that Naira for crude deal. From a national standpoint, it works for us. There's an impact on foreign exchange. There's an impact on inflation. There's an impact on jobs and a variety of other areas.
All right, and definitely we know Trump did talk about, wanting oil prices lower, going forward in 2025. We talked about the drill, baby drill mantra, but we're seeing oil prices actually tend lower, at this time with WTI losing that $70 per barrel psychological level. Is it downhill from here? Is it time to just pull up all the shorts for oil?
Yeah, so that's it. We also have our forecast at the African Energy Council, but I'll say a lot of the forecasts that you see outside, so you go Bloomberg, any of these companies, they see oil for this year at an average around the $74, $75 mark. Today we're about 70, okay, but generally around 74, 75. And the reason for that is several-fold. Yes, Donald Trump has come, and he's talking about drill, baby, drill. What does that mean? He wants the US to increase oil production in a very big way, not just oil, even gas as well. But if we stay with oil, think about this. Today, the US is the highest oil producer. They produce about 13 million barrels of oil today already. 13 million barrels. He wants them to increase that. The thesis that we have is when they increase that production, there's approximately about 2 million barrels that will come onto the market, oversupply. With that oversupply, the price of crude oil will come down significantly. There's no question about that. And if that happens, then I think, for a state like Nigeria, we need to start to think very cleverly around what to do. What's the price point for our budget? How do we peg to make sure that we're still, very competitive? What's for market share and all of that? But without a doubt, I think we should brace in for a period of volatility in the short to medium term. I think there will be quite a lot of turbulence. The other dimension, Ladi, is the tariffs. And I think that has even more of an impact, actually. You've probably seen this. There are lots of talk of the US potentially going to recession, parts of it going to recession. Now, if that starts to happen, the global economy would take a shock. And with that, ultimately, people will stop spending money, stop traveling. Demand for crude oil will also plummet. So now we're talking supply. So think about this. If they put 2 million barrels onto the market, that's an oversupply situation. If a recession comes, that would destroy demand. So all of a sudden, you have a double whammy situation. And that is what I think could be the game changer for 2025. So smart, oil traders are already hedging their bets. Smart governments are forecasting, their budget in a very, very sensible way. And I hope we're doing the same.
Right. Time to get, sensible at this point. It's quite incredible how the tariffs just come on and go off or paused. A lot to look out for in 2025. That was Chinandekwa, Vice Chair, African Energy Council. It was great having your perspective today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure, Barton. Thank you.